is by Reverend Nancy Stratford. It's called That Which Holds All. Because she wanted everyone to feel included in her prayer, she said right at the beginning several names for the holy. She said, Holy One, Mystery, God. But then, thinking that these weren't enough ways of addressing that which cannot be fully addressed, she added particularities, saying, Spirit of life, Spirit of love, Ancient Holy One, Mystery we will not ever fully know, Gracious God, and also Spirit of this earth, God of Sarah, Gaia, Thou. And then, tongue loosened, she fell to naming superlatives as well. Most creative one, greatest source, closest hope. Even though superlatives for the sacred seemed to her probably redundant, but then she couldn't stop. One who made the stars, she said, although she knew technically a number of those present didn't believe the stars had been made by anyone or thing, but just luckily happened. One who is an entire ocean of compassion, she said, and no one laughed. That which has been present since before the beginning, she said, and the room was silent. Then, although she hadn't imagined it this way, others began to offer names. Peace, said one. One my mother knew, said another. Ancestor, said a third. Wind, rain, breath, said one near the back. Refuge, that which holds all. A child said water. Someone said Kuan Yin, then moon, witness, great kindness, great eagle, eternal stillness. And then there wasn't any need to say the things she thought would be important to say. And everyone sat hushed until someone said, Amen. You pray for me, and I'll pray for you. Cada dia, I said. Yes, every day, she said. Answering her English words to me in Spanish, even my limited Spanish, somehow made our promise to each other seem more solemn, more serious, more binding. She reached into her bag and pulled out her business card. It was full color with a beautiful photograph of her, Spanish on one side, English on the other. It said, beauty consultant, hair, nails, makeup. The only thing missing was high priestess. That's who she was to her family and to me. I met Iris, I'll call her Iris, on the night her sister died. I was the chaplain on call working the overnight shift. Around 10:30 one evening, I was summoned to the room of a patient. I'll call her Carla. The message on the pager said, please come. Patient transitioning to CMO, comfort measures only. Family here, requesting prayers. A quick look in the system told me that Carla and her family were Catholic. Carla had struggled mightily for many months against cancer, and all treatment options had been exhausted. She did not want heroic measures. When the family was ready, the machines would be switched off, and Carla would expire. My job would be to offer prayers and help them say goodbye. When I first interviewed for the chaplaincy training program at this hospital, the supervisor mentioned that people from many faiths and backgrounds came to this hospital for treatment. How would I feel, she asked, about being an interfaith chaplain? I smiled, perhaps a bit too confidently, but this was an interview. As a Unitarian Universalist, I said, pretty much every interaction is interfaith. She smiled at that, and I knew I was in. When my turn came at the morning chaplaincy meeting to share a sacred text, I offered that reading that I just read for us, that which holds all. A prayer invoking some of the many names for the holy. One of my colleagues in the training program, a Catholic priest from Nigeria, was so taken with the reading that he asked me for a copy. When anyone asks me for a Unitarian Universalist reading, I give it to them. Later that week, when he led a worship service in the hospital chapel, he offered some of those different names for the holy, a Catholic priest, along with his own God the Father. I was so glad to be in this program. It only knew you, and here I was having an impact on my colleagues, even on a Catholic priest. And yes, I was a little smug about that. What I couldn't have known at this point was how deep and lasting an impact my time there would have on me. There's a wonderful book called How to Be a Perfect Stranger, and it's full of tips about how to behave when you attend a worship service in a faith tradition other than your own. And I had read that book, and I was ready to be a perfect stranger with Buddhists and Hindus and Muslims, Jews, evangelical Christians, and agnostics. Kind of like Father Mulcahy on MASH, remember that? He was like my ideal, the chaplain. And I did have wonderful experiences with people from every faith background, but I will confess that the Catholic patients challenged me and changed me the most, I think. I entered Carla's hospital room. There must have been 20 people there, speaking quietly in Spanish to each other. Carla's son greeted me in English, as did his son, a teenager, trying hard to keep from crying, but obviously quite sad, as everyone was. There were brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews, cousins, godchildren, and aunties, older women who called her Carlita as they smoothed her hair and kissed her forehead. Carla looked younger than her 62 years, lying in that bed, eyes closed, a breathing tube in her mouth, IVs in both arms, the rhythmic sound of the ventilator punctuating the quiet. I'd like to say she looked peaceful, and I hope and pray that she did find peace that night. But there's something jarring about seeing a person connected to a machine doing the breathing for her. Something so primitive, so innate. The first thing we do and the last. There was a woman in the hallway wearing a surgical mask. She had had some kind of bone marrow treatment that left her with a compromised immune system, and she was told to stay away from crowds, and I imagine places with a lot of sick people like hospitals. But here she was. Who was this woman, I wondered, that so many people, young and old, would drop everything to come to this hospital late at night to say goodbye to her? And then there was Iris. She was the person they'd been waiting for. As soon as she got word that her sister was dying, she hopped on a plane to where her sister was. Iris greeted me warmly. She accepted my condolences and then said in a mixture of Spanish and English, "I am a minister too, in my community, Catholic." This part she said with a bit of apprehension. Would I accept her as a minister? Would I see her as part of some renegade Catholic group that allowed women to serve as ministers outside of church teaching? And I thought, boy, you sure got the right chaplain. A Unitarian Universalist who comes from a long line of renegades. "I don't know the prayers in English," she said. "That's okay. I will pray in English and you can pray in Spanish." She pulled out a small metal box called a pyx. It holds the communion wafer. She asked the question with her eyes. "Could I?" "Por supuesto," of course, I said. The sun signaled that we could begin. I started, as I almost always do with Catholic families, with the Lord's Prayer. Only no one said it with me. Were the younger English-speaking folks not religious? I wondered, I finished the Lord's Prayer and then added a personal prayer for comfort, for gratitude for the life of this woman, for the love in the room, and I offered a blessing for Carla by hand on her shoulder. I remembered my own experience growing up in the Catholic Church. I loved being there. The mystery, the ritual, the sacred space. And then as I grew older and I started listening to the words, I found I couldn't stay. Maybe some of you had a similar experience with your faith community growing up. I just couldn't say words I didn't believe in. I left at age 13 just after I made confirmation and was unchurched for many years. And I was angry. I would rail against the teachings of the church, the positions they took on the ordination of women, on reproductive health. But my heart was breaking. I missed the ritual and the sense of connection to the holy in community. I found other spiritual practices, but I missed church. Back in Carla's hospital room, Iris began her prayers. And the family, her congregation, joined in, every one of them, praying as Iris led them. There was a beautiful rhythm to the prayers, and I found myself joining in at times, quietly when I heard a word I knew, like a child almost, intoning along with others on vowel sounds, saying the prayers phonetically, without understanding the words. And then I realized in a way that I had never had before, it wasn't about the words. I could have stopped one of these people in their prayers and asked them what the words meant, and perhaps they could have told me, but I'm sure they would have found the question odd. It wasn't about the words, it was about community, about sending their loved one home to God, surrounding her with love. Iris blessed the communion wafer and touched it to Carla's lips. The Eucharist would be the last thing that Carla ever tasted. And then Iris offered a sign of peace, and suddenly everyone was hugging and kissing each other and kissing Carla, and they even hugged and kissed me, saying, paz. One of the most extraordinary things among many was that each time I looked up at either the son or the brother, they mouthed the words, thank you, to me. Now, I was puzzled by that. It seemed unnecessary, and I was curious. And then one of the nurses came in somewhere in the midst of the hugging and the kissing. She looked around the room, which now fell silent. Is the chaplain here? I waved to indicate my presence. Oh, okay, she said, and then she left the room, and the hugging and the crying and the paz and lo siento continued. And then I understood why they were thanking me. My presence there authorized their gathering, their way of being together in this moment. My job was to show up and hold the space for them. They were grateful, I realized, because I honored their way of being without trying to change it or control it. And I did truly honor their way of being, their beautiful Catholic way of being. For many years, I had carried around a lot of anger about my time in the Catholic Church. Anger about having to leave it, about not finding a home there. And like so many of you who have found your way to Unitarian Universalism from another faith tradition, I arrived grateful to have found a place where I could bring my whole self. But did I bring my whole self? I brought my gay self, my feminist self, my liberal self, my angry at the Catholic Church self. But as I have looked at that anger and realized how tiring it was to hold on to it, and as I have worked to let it go, I realized that underneath the anger was grief and longing and woundedness. And as Rumi tells us, the wound is the place where the light enters us. That's where the openings are, but only if we let go of what is keeping our hearts closed. The anger protects us from grief, but it also closes us to longing and to love. Now, I'm not returning to the Catholic Church. I'm a Unitarian Universalist. This is where I belong. But there is a part of me that is still connected to that earliest part of my faith journey, a part of me that is still Catholic. What part of yourself might you be leaving outside the door when you enter here? Those of you who have come out of other faiths, can you risk bringing not only your anger at the rejection you felt, though of course there is room for that here, and certainly within the Catholic Church where there has been great misconduct, the anger at that is completely justified, and I'm really not talking about the politics or the structure of the church. I'm talking about the faith. Is there room not only for your anger, but also for your grief, for your longing, for your woundedness? The wound is the place where the light enters. I arrived at that hospital kind of smug about my ability to be an interfaith chaplain. I could be a perfect stranger, but could I love my neighbor as myself? More importantly, could I love my neighbors as themselves? See them as they are connected to a faith that did not work for me, but still be able to see the beauty in the faith that they love, and the faith that holds and comforts them. The prayers offered, the blessings given. Carla died surrounded by people who loved her, led by Iris, their priest. I found myself wanting a blessing from Iris for my ministry. But of course I couldn't ask for that. I was the chaplain, the one with the authority. And then, as if she sensed this desire in me, she said these words: "You pray for me, and I'll pray for you." Cada dia, I said. Yes, every day. So many lessons and many gifts for me in that holy encounter. The wound is the place where the light